Okay, good.
So carry on. We were just waiting for
Yeah.
you, Anand.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Okay. So this is this is a seminar which, in part, I have requested, partly because there was a lot of interest in Professor Goldar's paper, and I'm very glad uh, Nagesh, Satiki, and who's our third discussant?
Nagaraj and Suresh Babu.
Suresh. There is
Suresh
Suresh.
Babu
I
and
didn't see
Nagaraj.
Suresh. Yeah. No, Nagraj, I have agreed to also discuss the paper. So we have a very exciting thing. I don't think Professor Goldar needs any introduction to all of you. He's been a familiar figure. He's on the area of productivity measurement, industrial economics, and so on. So I'm not going to waste time in introducing Professor Goldar. Uh, I have some observations on his paper as well, and I will reserve them after his presentation and after the discussants have had a chance to also make their say. So, without much ado, Professor Goldar, are you ready?
Much.
Yeah. Okay. Your floor is yours. You requested 35 minutes, so you'll have 35 minutes, and after that, the discussants, as per what Beena told me, will have 10 minutes apiece, but we can adjust it a bit so that we have time for question answer discussion. I'm sure other people are also equally interested in the topic.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I must say that I'm grateful to ISID for organizing this event, particularly Dr. Nagesh Kumar, Dr. Veena Saraswati, making it possible to share my research in the area of manufacturing sector growth. And what we are going to discuss today has a lot of significance to India's future growth strategy. Will it be majorly manufacturing driven, led, or not? Those questions are there. I will, as Mrs. Chairman said, try to complete the presentation in 35 minutes. And if there is some overlap, it will go to in the QA. Particularly methodological questions I will not discuss, but I will take them up in the later under the QA. Now, I think my screen is visible.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the title, is India deindustrializing? I have 35 minutes, so I must time myself. Trends in manufacturing, share in GDP. And this is the outline. Premature deindustrialization concept and findings of recent study. Assessing structural change in the Indian economy, should we use GDP data at current prices or GDP data at constant prices? Then computing GVA at constant prices, should we use single deflation or double deflation? Then manufacturing share in India's GDP using double deflated GDP, what are the trends? Then I come to price index of ICT equipment, mobiles, tablets, laptops, and the hedonic price index and what implications it has for estimates of manufacturing GVA growth. GVA stands for gross value added. And finally, investigating premature deindustrialization in India using data on 8 states. So this is the, now we move to this concept. What is the meaning of premature deindustrialization? Today's advanced economies experienced an inverted U-shaped relationship, as you can see in the diagram, between per capita income and the share of manufacturing in GDP, which I will be calling MVA share. And there is a particular level of per capita income at which they stopped any growing further and then began to fall. Now, this peak at which the per capita income at which this peak occurred in advanced economies, compared to that, the peak is occurring at a much lower level in the today's developing and emerging market. This is the issue of premature deindustrialization. This diagram tells it. This curve of the average advanced economies, you can see there is an inverted U-shaped relationship and a particular per capita income. The manufacturing share began to fall in GDP. This is also happening now, but it is happening at a much lower level of per capita income. So how much lower? And is in the Indian case also it is still lower or not? That is the question. Now, this paper by Ozelik and Osman, 2023, I think Cambridge University Press, they have analyzed premature deindustrialization using a large panel data set of advanced, emerging, and developing economies. And the question is, at what per capita income peak manufacturing share of GDP occurs or occurred? So in today's advanced economies, it occurred at 9,000 USD at 2005 prices. In emerging market economies, it on average occurred at $1,890 at 2005 constant USD prices. And in developing countries, it has occurred in $807, almost $800 at 2005 constant USD prices, average for 35 countries. And the results verify that there is premature, I'll be calling PD hereafter, premature devaluation in emerging market economies and developing economies, except East Asian countries. Now, whenever you see an asterisk, it is message from the first part, message from the second section, key message. So it appears reasonable to argue that for investigating premature deindustrialization and making a right comparison of PACI at which peak MBA occurred, one should consider PPP exchange rate. Now, for example, in Amirapu and Subramaniam paper, 2015, they are comparing at the 200 and 2005 US dollar at PPP. Similarly, Rawthorn and Ramaswamy, IMF working paper, they are considering GDP at constant prices for computing shares and per capita income in 1985 US dollars using PPP exchange rate. This I am saying because sometimes people are not comparing at PPP exchange rate. That is the point. So Arauzo et al. 2021 examined they using GBA at constant prices and per capita income at PPP exchange rate 2005 US dollars. More recent paper by Sato and Kawamori, 2024, using real GDP share as well as nominal GDP share and per capita income in terms of constant 2011 international dollars. The problem is that I have a paper here by Jose, who looks at the data for 2006 to 2016 and then says India's manufacturing share is falling and that it has not even reached 2,000 US dollars. But this 2,000 US dollars is not at PPP. That is the point. Now, how do you assess the structural change? Should you use structural change by taking GDP at current price or GDP at constant price? That is the second question. Now, look at this. This is not in my paper. Korean economy, share of manufacturing GDP, blue line is at current prices. The red line is at constant prices. Nowadays, a lot of people are using current price data and then saying things are not good. In Korea, if suppose a Korean economist would have looked at it, after 1984, the share did not grow any further. And therefore, one can say manufacturing firm performed poorly or did not perform well because share at current prices is not growing. But if you look at the share at constant prices, you'll see there is a steady rise. It is only in 2012 that the share stopped growing further, at which the per capita income was about 25,000 US dollars. So the latter interpretation is correct, that the performance has been going on and the share has been rising till about 2012 and not at 1986, which one might believe looking at the current price data. Look at this one. Post and telecommunications industry. Mobiles and internet have revolutionized the Indian economy, but what is their share out of the total services sector? Their share has been falling if you look at the current price data. But if you look at the constant price data, their share has been rising. Again, looking at the current price data gives you a totally false impression about the structural change taking place in the economy. This report, India Employment Report 2024 by IHD and ILO, considered sectoral shares in employment and sectoral shares in GVA at 2011-12 prices. I am emphasizing this, constant prices, to study structural change. Arguably, this is a correct approach. The question is, are price movements part of structural change? If they are not, then one should consider sectoral shares in employment and sectoral shares in GDP at constant prices. That is what I am arguing here should be done. But if one say, no, prices are part of structural change, then obviously one can take GDP at current prices, because if an industry's output does not grow, but its price grows, then also the shares are shifting to that industry. But if this applies to price of output, this should also apply to price of labor. And therefore, you cannot take sectoral shares in employment or sectoral shares in workers. You must take sectoral shares in wages and salaries, because if price is a part of structural change, therefore there is an inconsistency here. If there is a strong argument to take sectoral shares in employment, one has to correspondingly take structural shares in output at constant prices. Anyway, I'll skip this. This basically is a study by Gruber et al. In econometric research that basically shows that increase in real share of manufacturing GDP are understated by increasing nominal shares in low income and middle income countries. Or this one, Islam and Iverson, who note that high productivity advances made by manufacturing sector may cause the relative price of the sector to decrease, thus hiding the more pronounced change in the physical output in the sector. The main message is, to assess structural change, sectoral shares in GDP at constant prices is appropriate, not share at current prices. Then if it is constant price, we say that is good and that should we use single deflation and double deflation. To this audience, I don't have to say which one is right. Everyone will know this. But to explain, those who are not fully aware of the computations and methods in this area, what is single deflation? Output price is used to deflate the value of output, and the same price index is used to deflate the value of intermediate. For example, steel price is used to deflate the steel produced, and it is the same steel price index which is used to deflate the iron ore consumed. Double deflation means output is deflated by output price index, and intermediate input is deflated by the intermediate. And then after you get an inflation corrected value of output and inflation corrected value of intermediate input, you subtract and you get the double deflated value added. Obviously, conceptually, this is better. This example shows it how it is done using India claims data. There's an output series, there is an intermediate input series. 3 is 2 minus 1 minus 2, then you get a GVA nominal, divide by output price index, you get GVA real or constant price GVA, dividing by output. This is a single deflation. Now look at this one, double deflation. You have an output series, you have an intermediate input series, you have a price series for output, you have a price series for intermediate inputs. Divide output by output price index, get real output. Divide intermediate input by intermediate price index, get into real input, and then subtract, you get real GVA. Look at the difference between the DDA, the double deflated, and single deflated. This arises because double deflation is doing correct estimation of the value added. Now, Balakrishnan and Pushpan Gadan, 1994 EPW, and other several papers subsequently, and Rao, 1996, noted that there are biases in the measurement of real GVA growth and productivity growth associated with single deflation. SNA 2008 recommended double deflation. The desirability of double deflation was noted in the Sources and Methods 2007 document of India's national accounts. Among G20 countries, India is one of the few that still uses single deflation. Most of them use double deflation. Double deflation was used in the USA in 1962, France in 60s, Mexico in 70, Japan in 78, Brazil in 1990, South Korea in 2004. In short, to assess the trends of manufacturing sector growth and manufacturing share in GDP, double deflated GVA data are better than single deflated GVA. Trends. Trends in the manufacturing sector in aggregate when double deflation method is used. The diagram says it all, that single deflation, current prices don't show any increase. But if you use double deflated, then the share increases from 16% in 2003-04 to 34% in 2018-19, doubling in 15 years. Basic message is double deflation captures the right growth in the manufacturing sector and therefore shows the share correctly. Now, why it is happening? The reason is that input prices have grown much faster than output price, and that is not being captured when you use single deflation. Look at this one. The wholesale price index of manufactured products rose by 65% between 2004 and 2019. Price index of minerals, intermediate input, rose by 373%. Price index of sugarcane, tobacco, raw rubber, gore seed rose by 169%. that have agricultural raw materials like fiber and oilseed rose by 130. When input prices are growing much faster than output prices, single deflation will understate growth, and therefore the share will also get understated. Now, based on this series, if you try to fit a trend equation and try to ascertain if there is a maximum, you can say, well, the maximum peak occurred in 22-23 at a per capita income of 9,500 at 2005 PPP USD. But one cannot rule out from this diagram that the peak is there, because looking at the trend, there's an upward trend, and maybe it keeps on growing, and look at the new policies that have come. One cannot be sure that the peak that was reached in 2018 is the peak. Maybe it will still go on further. And if this is not the peak, and we are going to see much higher ratio, there is no question of any premature deindustrialization. So that is the reason at top I've written significant increase in manufacturing share in GDP between 2003 and 2008. What about premature deindustrialization in? Price index of ICT equipment, mobiles, laptops, tablets, hedonic price index, and implications for estimates of manufacturing. This diagram tells the story. Deflator used in national accounts for ICT equipment, which is these tablets and mobile phones, etc., rose by 20% between 2011 and 2021. Actually, this is also the increase in the wholesale price index for this category. But hedonic price index, which corrects for quality improvement, fell by 60%. Everyone knows that prices of mobiles keep on falling. Prices of laptops keep on falling. Same specification next year is available cheaper. But somehow this has not come into our WPI, and therefore has not come into our national accounts. This series has been prepared by Dr. Abdul Eramban of University of Groningen, and I thank him for sharing this series with me. Now, once this series is brought in, now this is using, not earlier I used 2004-05 prices. Now I'm using the 2011-12 prices. Look at the current price series, manufacturing. This is falling, and one may get an impression that things are very bad in manufacturing because the share of manufacturing in GDP is falling. But look at the single deflated, double deflated, and look at the top one, which is double deflated and hedonic price index for ICT equipment, corrected. The increase between 2011 and 2021 is about 4 percentage points. What have been said about the ICT industry also applies to automobiles. This is important because automobiles is this very important sector and a very fast growing sector in the Indian economy. It accounts for about 7% of GVA. And a study for UK shows that about 65% of the observed increase in car prices between 2008 and 2019 was caused by improvement in the quality. And if you create an hedonic price index for car, it rose by 13% between these 2 years, and the standard price index rose by 36%. This point will also likely to apply also to India. I don't know how wholesale price index in this sector are being computed. So it's quite possible that the wholesale price index for the automobile sector are overstating the growth in price, are not fully able to take into account the quality improvements. And if the deflator for auto industry are based on a hedonic price index, then it's quite possible that the estimated real GVA growth of auto industry and therefore the manufacturing industry would have been higher. So message from this section is, we need hedonic price index for ICT equipment. I'm not saying car, at least ICT equipment we need it for a better assessment of the manufacturing sector, because I note that at constant prices and using the hedonic price index, the relative share of ICT equipment industry out of total manufacturing was almost 20%. So this is a sector where you saw the earlier price index. Now you can see what should be the true pricing. This is investigating premature deindustrialization in India using data for 8 states. These are the 8 states being covered: Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Gujarat, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, and Uttarakhand. Together, they account for 2/3 of the manufacturing GVA, or organized sector. Andhra Pradesh was divided into 2 states in 2014. Therefore, to have an intertemporal comparable series, these have to be taken together, merged. And what is being considered? It is a ratio of organized manufacturing GVA to GSDP. This ratio, both are double deflated. And this is similar to the work of Amirapu and Subramanian. Organized sector manufacturing GVR taken from ASI. It is actually the EPWRF database from which data are being taken. And double deflated series are constructed, and it is given in the paper how it has been constructed. But it's a very simple method that is being done. Improvements are possible, but a very simple method is being used. So once we get the organized sector gross value added double deflated from ASI, and GSDP double deflated with some adjustment done, then ratio is taken and that is studied. And you can see Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, there is an upward trend. There is no question of any peak coming here. Even at 10,900 per capita income at 2,000 PPP USD, no peak is visible. In Gujarat, the data suggests a peak at about $8,900 per capita income at 2005 pp. In Karnataka, a peak is suggested by the data at about $10,000 at 2005 PPP. In Maharashtra, the peak is at about $8,500 PPP. The important point about Maharashtra is, in the paper this has been discussed, in the Amirapu and Subramaniam paper, they said in Maharashtra the peak had occurred in 1986. But you will note that in this with double deflation, the peak is occurring somewhere about 2013 or 14, I don't remember. And at a much higher per capita income than what they had. In Tamil Nadu, a peak is occurring roughly at about $10,000 at 2005 purchasing power parity. In Uttar Pradesh, there is an upward trend, no clear. These have been tested by fitting a second degree and linear and seeing in the quadratic term is statistically significant or not. Otherwise, a linear trend has been allowed. But even at the per capita income in Uttar Pradesh is much lower, 3,900, and at this purchasing power. At this per capita income, there is no upward trend. It's quite possible that it will make it. In Uttarakhand, interestingly, Uttarakhand, the share of manufacturing is much higher. You will note that the peak has been reached about 60%. Manufacturing share of 60% in the state GDP. And in 1 year, it is 70% of state GDP. There is a very high share of manufacturing in Uttarakhand. And the peak has been reached at about $9,000 at 2005 PPP. These numbers are somewhat higher than the numbers I had given in the paper available at ResearchGate, because I have reworked the purchasing power, where again, Abdul has been of great help to me, I must say. And I've reworked this purchasing power parity numbers, and they are slightly higher. Overall, all the 6 states taken together, peak is at about 6,000. Now, the manufacturing share in Uttar Pradesh has an upward turn. Peak may occur at a much higher level of per capita GSDP than present. Manufacturing GVA in Uttar Pradesh in 22-23 was 276,000 crore. And ASI component was only 134,000 crore. That is half. So actually only looking at ASI and trying to trace the peak, etc., may not be very right for Uttar Pradesh, with a huge amount of unorganized sector manufacturing. And this segment has grown very rapidly. As you know, that ASU's data shows that 2023-24 employment in unorganized manufacturing grew by 10%. Uttar Pradesh accounted for 20% of all new industrial units in the country, and 15% of incremental employment in the country between 21, 22, and 20. The point is that although Uttar Pradesh there showed a very low level, actually this is growing rapidly and its peak may come much later. So if Uttar Pradesh we exclude and consider the other 7 states, then the peak MVA share occurred at a per capita GSDP of about 9,000 to 10,000 PPP USD. This matches the estimate at the economy. Now look at this comparison of different studies. Ozlek and Osman 2023. According to them, peak MBA share in India occurred in 1996 at a per capita income of $510. Amirapu and Subramaniam, their estimate is that India peak occurred in 2008 at a per capita income of $3,000 at 2005 USD. Joseph et al. 2020, they, from their paper, from reading of their paper, it seems the peak was somewhere about 2006 or thereabout, and it occurred at an income of about 2,000 US dollars. But in this study, the peak occurred in between 2018 to 21, or maybe it has not occurred at all. It will occur in future at a income of $9,000 to $10,000, 2005 US pricing per month. So is India deindustrializing prematurely? The answer is yes and no. Now you see why it is yes and why it is. So we have noted above that peak MBA may have been, I have written may have been, because we don't know. Because our trends are all rising and we don't know. Although state-wise we're showing some inverted U shape, but other states are growing fast. So altogether, what is happening in India, we don't know. May have occurred at $9,000 to $10,000, 2005 PPP USD. Ozelic and Osman's report that advanced countries, they reach their peak MBA share in per capita income level of about 9,000 US dollars. There is no difference. So from this, one might appear that, well, India reached its peak at the same level as the advanced economies reached. But actually, there is a catch here. The problem is that we need to compare per capita income peak, not in share of manufacturing in value added at current prices, but share of manufacturing in value added at constant prices. So it is the real MVA share which we have to compare, because the above analysis was about the real MVA, not nominal MVA. So real MVA share peaked in advanced economies, OECD countries actually estimate about $37,400 at constant 2011 international dollars, Sato and Kuamori 2000. So compared to this, $37,400, whatever we have seen so far is much less. But if MBA peak has occurred in India already, if we believe, then it has occurred at a lower level and therefore one can interpret it. But as I have argued earlier, I am not too sure. We are not too sure looking at the trends that whether the peak has already occurred or the peak will occur in future. Now looking at this third group, emerging market economies, I'll soon finish, emerging market economies of Southeast Asia, China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Thailand. If you look at their peak real MBA share, not nominal, real MBA share, that occurred, these data I have taken from the WDI and tried to assess for each country what is the year in which the share peaked. Like in Korea, I showed 25,000. Korea I have excluded because Korea is more like an advanced economy rather than an emerging economy. So these, on average, their peak occurred at $12,400 at constant 2021 international dollars. Now, compared to that, the situation in India is not very different because we have reached it at about $9,000 to $10,000 at 2005 PPP. This is a 2011 price, that is a 2005 price. So if these countries are such, and these countries did not experience PD, why I'm saying this? Ozelic and Ozeman in their analysis said that the premature deindustrialization has occurred in emerging and developing countries, but not in East Asia. So if these countries did not experience premature deindustrialization, then by the same logic, it should not be applicable to India either. But a bigger argument is, if we have not seen the peak yet, how can we say we are having premature deindustrialization? So conclusion, finally. stagnant falling trend in India's manufacturing, the manufacturing share in India's GDP has led to a pessimistic impression about the performance of Indian manufacturing and viability of a manufacturing-led growth strategy in India for future. However, when properly computed, there has been a significant upward trend and in real MBA share. So there is no need or there is no rational basis for such pessimism. Second, there is an impression that India is experiencing premature deindustrialization. This assessment is right if a strict comparison is made with the per capita income levels at which real MBA peaked in today's advanced countries. And if you make it to the India, certainly it's true. But when other considerations are brought in, what other considerations? When we compare ourselves with the Southeast Asian countries, or we bring in the consideration that we have not reached any peak yet, there are doubts. Perhaps India is not experiencing any premature deindustrialization, at least not in any significant manner. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Golda. You have been extremely conscious of time and very succinct and focused on your points. I have 3 discussions scheduled. The order in which they were given was Professor Suresh Babu was first, then Nagaraj, and then Satyaki. If I can go with that, or if anybody prefers to go first, I'll be happy to shift the order around also.
Let's start with Professor Nagaraj.
No, let's go with the order then.
As I said, I will be happy to. Okay, Suresh, since you were listed first in the program, we'll start with you.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. And I've been following Professor Golda's work maybe for the last 30 years. And, you know, it has been a great learning experience for people of my generation to have new insights on the manufacturing sector from the works of Professor Golda. And on the other side, I have Professor Nagaraj, whose works also we have been following for many decades. So sandwiched in between, I take this opportunity to offer some comments, basically in terms of elaborating some of the methodological issues that one would encounter when we move to double deflation. I have a small PPT. Let me just put it up. Give me a minute. Yeah. I hope it is visible.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, so these are the 3 points that I want to make. That is double deflation, what are the advantages and some of the issues. And I also would like to show some trends in industrial growth. And I'm using industrial growth in a broad sense, not only manufacturing. And some issues in terms of identifying premature deindustrialization, where I have some supporting evidence to what Professor Golda has already presented. Now, when we talk of double deflation, I think it is very important to go back to the notion of real value added. And Sims and Arrow have already, perhaps long back itself, taken it back to the concept of a production function itself. And to quote Arrow here, imagine capital and labor cooperating to produce an intermediate good called real value added V, which in turn cooperates with materials to produce the final product. Following this view, real value added in any sector corresponds only to the quantity of bundle V that combines capital and labor. So implicitly, such a characterization of real value added actually implies separability in production function. And that is why measuring real value added becomes very, very important. Okay. Now, as Professor Golda had already mentioned, most of the estimates of real GVA are calculated using single deflation. And that is a single price index deflator is applied to deflate the estimated value of GVA. And in this 1994 paper of Balakrishnan and Pushpangadar, when I was a PhD student, we were trying to do some kind of a double deflation procedure, where double deflation applies different price indices to total output and intermediate inputs. And this is considered as an international best practice, of which Professor Goldar had already elaborated. Okay. Now let me talk to what could be a bias if we are talking about a single versus a double deflation. Just to take you through this in a very simple way, we can arrive at a single deflated value added for an industry, and we can arrive at a double deflated value added, and some algebraic rearrangement can give us a bias. That is slightly thick, this slide, but I just want to take your eyes onto one point. That is the growth of single deflated GDP is downwardly biased estimate of correct double deflated statistics whenever the inflation of input industry is higher than that of the industry of interest. So it is a question of relative prices that ultimately determines the extent of this bias, point number one. Point number two, the size of this bias in each industry depends on two factors. Yeah, when we look at industry level kind of arriving at value added. Now, this is very important if we are estimating productivity from value added production functions. First, the bias tends to be larger. The larger is the value of intermediate input for each unit of value added, and that is something which we need to keep in mind. Second, we also need to keep in mind that in order to give an order of magnitude of this multiplier, we have to keep in mind that on an average, about 3/5 of gross value added in every industry is used as intermediate consumption, which implies that a multiplier equal to 1.5 is something that is the bias that we really see. Very importantly, in the extent of bias arising out of deflation is also dependent upon the input-output structure of the economy and the relative inflation rate. And that is the point that I was emphasizing earlier. But when we are looking at the rate of growth of the entire economy, the overall bias can also be zero under certain conditions if biases of different signs cancel each other when considering the entire set of intermediate inputs into production. And this is a very interesting kind of a proof which Sir Charles Bean had actually produced when they were discussing about the United Kingdom's national accounts. Okay, so an important implicit assumption is underlying the usage of double deflation is that the base period price used to value intermediate inputs reflects both inputs' marginal cost and marginal revenue that can be derived from its usage. If true, then double deflation is indeed an accurate measure of physical value added. But if prices are distorted, for example, firms charge a markup, and we know that, then embedding this distortion in the construction of real value added creates a wedge between the what we call as the statistical value added captured in national accounts and the physical value added, which actually Christopher Sims was mentioning in his paper in 1969. And this is very intuitive because if a sector is charging a markup and makes profit, then these profits are part of the statistical value added measured using double deflation. So the point is that double deflation is superior, but it depends on how the quality of deflators are. Okay. So the key element here is that real value added cannot be constructed without prices, and price distortions do not need not to be vary over time to create a bias. Our usual kind of an assumption is that over change relative price movement is the one that creates a bias. Even without that, even under constant markups, there could be a bias, and a sector can create statistical value added by just increasing profits. Okay. Now, so the difference between double deflation and single deflation then depends on the relative price changes, where the input and output prices move relatively similarly the impact will be very small. And where the input prices rise faster than output prices, double deflation will estimate a smaller increase in the volume of inputs and hence a greater increase in GVA. And by extension, that can also be, extended to faster growth in productivity. So the reverse is also true when input prices rise more slowly than the output prices. So the point that again that I want to underline is it depends on the quality of prices that we are using in terms of deflating. Okay. Now, I shall skip this because this again restating this, the same point, but I just want to highlight only one aspect in this whole discussion, that good quality estimates under double deflation then requires all information on prices. And there are two possible sources of deflators that we use. First source is implicit deflators, which are commonly used. And the second source is what I would call as experimental industry level deflators, which are constructed from input output tables, which is used again by the CLEMS database also. But then both these gives an average of this input prices to some extent. And the experimental deflators, and certainly very likely the implicit deflators, are also last payers indices, and that are built up from lower level price indices at the product level. And for double deflation, a Paget index is preferable, so that the deflation of nominal values finally generates last payers indices of the volume of industry output. So again, the question here is in terms of what is the appropriate price series and how we are arriving at the deflators, which actually determines the kind of or a trajectory of growth in value added. And that's the point that I wanted to emphasize. Okay. Now, so that's my first point. My second point is on Professor Golda's very interesting question about structural change. And I did some very simple trend break tests, to test what are the years in which, perhaps the economy has witnessed some change. And this is for the period 1993 to 2023-24, 30-year period. And I do two types of structural break tests. One using the a single break test, that is popularly known as the Zivet Anduit test, which will actually give us a single break point. And the other, the Bailly-Perron test for multiple structural breaks. And what we find is that for industry, and I'm using industry, not manufacturing, industry in the national accounts definition, which includes construction as well as electricity, gas, and steam, the structural break, single structural break occurs in 2002. And once when we use a multiple break test, we find that 2005 is when industry witnessed a break, and the second break comes in 2021. It's very interesting to note that when we use multiple break tests, almost all sectors, that is agriculture, not except agriculture, industry, trade, financial services, public administration, and the gross value added, all of those series exhibit a break in 2021. And that's very interesting because, and that's when the economy actually, maybe bounced back after the COVID recovery. So statistically, we find that there is a break in trend, and both these tests actually are on the same lines on certain sectors at least. Now, then I also tried to test whether there is a break in the sectoral GVA growth. That is to see whether the growth is accelerating or is there an increase in the pace of growth after a point. And here I find that a single break test gives that the industry, of which manufacturing is an important component, starts accelerating after 2007. And the double break test also shows that there is only one important break year. There are no multiple breaks according to the Bailly and Perron test also, that it is in 2009 onwards that we find that the industry is actually growing. So there are signs of structural change that are happening, but the signs of this structural change started to come much earlier, perhaps in the later half of 2000 itself, and that continues now according to this data that I was looking at. And this is the graph, or the years, exact years, where I found breaks in terms of it's not manufacturing, it's industry, which includes manufacturing. Okay. Now, the second point that I wanted to emphasize is that, yes, there is growth. and when we use double deflation, there is also the magnitude of growth is slightly higher. But if we try to see or separate out cycles from the trends using a very simple HP filter method, we find that growth has become more cyclical. Yeah, and the blue line is the trend growth rate, and this yellowish line shows the cyclical component in that. So cyclical component is what is driving the actual rate of growth, and it's not the trend component, which means that we find that manufacturing or industries value added put together, we find that witnesses a lot of cyclicality as far as growth is concerned. Okay. Now, just to corroborate this whole point about value-added shares, yeah, which Professor Golder was presenting in terms of structural change, what I find is in relation to the structural break, the share of industry in value-added increased during the period 2005-6 to 2009-10, that is 28%, and it continues to remain the same. Yeah. Now, it is perhaps this kind of a stagnant share, and this is in real value added and not in nominal value added, an argument which Professor Golder actually makes in the paper, that one should use real value added. And it is this stagnant share perhaps that really prompts some of the earlier works and commentators on Indian economy to argue that there is premature deindustrialization. Now, coming to this question of premature deindustrialization, I think there are two aspects to that. One, is it premature or is it deindustrialization is this question. Yeah. Now, and this has to be seen in terms of the level of income as well as the status of the manufacturing sector. Yeah. Income factor, premature if deindustrialization occurs at lower levels. Status of manufacturing sector, premature if the economy has not yet exploited the channels of manufacturing driven economic growth. And in a paper in 2022 in the same journal, Structural Change and Economic Dynamics, I have some evidence on this across 52 emerging economies, where we use a test to see whether emerging economies are actually, after that paper came in Cambridge Journal. So we test using 5 conditions to identify whether an economy is actually entering into a premature deindustrialization or not. And these conditions, the first and second conditions traces deindustrialization trend. The third condition states whether the per capita income is lower than that of a developed country, which is provided by Jesus Felpe in a very interesting article in 2017. Yeah, and the fourth and fifth conditions specify that an economy in a year T should not have employment and value-added share greater than a percentage, which we get statistically as 18% respectively. So using these 5 tests, we use data for the period 1992 to 2017, 53 middle-income countries, and we find that 32 countries experience premature deindustrialization. Interestingly, India is not in that, and using the 5 tests that we propose. But we found that 5 out of 15 Asian countries, 3 out of 8 countries from Europe and Central Asia, 12 of the 14 Latin American countries, and 3 out of the 4 Middle East and North American countries, 9 out of the 12 Sub-Saharan African countries were under the PDI phase, premature deindustrialization phase. So that's some further evidence which we see when we talk about whether India has entered or is already entering premature deindustrialization or not. Okay, now I'm just concluding with some observations. One, double deflation is superior. Yes, there's no doubt about that. But then there is one question that comes: does this higher value-added growth under increased prices of inputs indicate more material consumption? What is the kind of an interpretation that we have in terms of material intensity of manufacturing? 2, what are the implications for productivity growth? Does it really show any signs of efficiency in terms of material use or not? 3, the point that we really want to emphasize here is it is sensitive to deflators, and that is a point which Professor Golder also emphasizes when he talks of hedonic prices and the use of hedonic prices. And 4, there is a very important issue regarding identifying premature deindustrialization. I think very simple, straightforward commentaries might not help here. We need to have a set or a battery of tests using employment as well as value added to see whether there are signs of that. And fifth and more important, when we are talking about premature deindustrialization in India and the signs of that, perhaps we need to reckon with the fact that there is a growth of low-end service sector and there is an increase in the low-end service sector jobs, which perhaps is often interpreted as signs of premature deindustrialization. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Babu. You made a number of very interesting points. I particularly do want people to pay close attention to the point which you made on the issue of quality of deflators and how it impacts double deflation measurement. I think we may come back to this at a later stage, but other points are equally valid. So I'll now turn to Professor Nagaraj.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll just try to share my very brief few observations.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Bina. Thank you, Chair, for this. Yeah, I have a very brief. First is, in principle, double deflation is better. I mean, there can't be any disputes about that. However, the results depend exactly on the methods implemented, the methods used to implement. I mean, the point which I think Suresh mentioned. Example, say, just to, Dr. Ravindra Dholakia's response to Dr. Shetty and Dennis Rajakumar's paper during the GDP debate, Dr. Dholakia showed, look, you can get any result you want depending upon the how do you value what inputs you take in and how do you price them, what kind of price indices you use. We're trying to get. So the point of the doing, and I remember similar arguments are there when Pulapre Balakrishnan's paper came out earlier, which showed that. So therefore, my point is, is it clear? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're clear.
Okay. So therefore, the point is that in principle, I mean, there's no disagreement about the need for the use of double deflation. I mean, that's very clear. But the question is, when you want to do it, the difficulties are practical in terms of what quality of data we have. Okay, and on that, I think we have serious issues. And India does not have suitable price deflators. India does not have PPI, that is Producer Price Index. Next slide, please. Yes. Historically, my impression is that WPI and CPI moved in parallel for a long time, with former used as a policy variable. In 2010, CPI became a policy variable after inflation targeting. For various reasons, pass-through of oil price rise was controlled. LPG prices became a political variable. So this led to, my impression is, in 2010s, the divergence between CPI and WPI, and all that led to, I think, contributed to further complicated our price data, which could have contributed to differences in the estimates we got by single deflation and double deflation. I suspect that the divergence between price indices created problems. Hence, I mean, sticking to single deflation based may be preferable until we have better price series. Please don't get me wrong saying that I am a believer in single price deflation. Not at all. It's a question of how well we can do with the newer method. That's my problem. Next slide, please. Yeah. Yeah. I have there seems to be some problems with CLEMS database. The CLEMS database is based on the NAS 11-12 series and its back series. It has problems, as the GDP debate had demonstrated. I think there's still problems with it, which people don't talk about it very much these days. The issue flagged in the debate still remain unresolved. That's my view. Okay. Statisticians like P. Mohanan have recently raised serious questions about the CLEMS employment series, I think, which to me look very valid. Okay, I think that we need to consider in using the CLEMS results. Considering the database and methodological problems, Okay, validating estimates based on double deflation with related macro aggregates is essential. I mean, this is general scientific principle I use. However good your method is, however good your data is, ultimately when you get the results, it must make sense with other correlates. I mean, this is a standard scientific principle in any discipline. Okay, and I usually use this whenever I do whatever little work I do. I try to use this. Okay, and now I will see why my problems with double deflation. Okay, I'll give you a set of 5 graphs to raise questions about the kind of results which Professor Goldar reported. Next slide, please. Yeah, first is this. This is the GVA estimates of NA's 2011-12 series is overestimates as flagged in the GDP debate using the same deflator when ASI-based estimates are distinctly lower than NAS-based estimates. I'm using for manufacturing. Then you find that the ASI-based estimates of value-added, single deflation, okay, is distinctly lower than the NAS estimates, which only says, look, we have problems with the basic raw data, that is NAS 2011-12. That's my first point. Okay, double deflation or single deflation GVA figures obtained by MCA database are faulty. That's my first point. Second, next slide, please. Yeah. Next is gross fixed capital formation GDP ratio in 2010s has declined. Okay, and within that, the share of manufacturing has declined. Okay, so is it plausible that the manufacturing GVA share could have doubled when its investment rate had declined? I think somewhere we need to correlate these facts and see, is it possible? Okay, these are real questions. Okay. Next slide, please. Dr. Goldar's paper in that structural change economic development, the abstract said the GDP share of manufacturing has increased during the post-reform period from 17% in 1993-94 to 32% in 2018-19. Right? I mean, here is a graph which gives the data of select countries' share of GVA in manufacturing in select countries for 2015 and 2020. Okay, highest share here, this is World Bank data. Highest share for China is 26%. Okay, and our share, as per Professor Goldar's data, is 32%. Does it sound that's possible? I mean, is India more industrialized than China? Okay, then next slide. Yeah, if so, why India is growing dependent on China? Why is this trade dependency? India's dependency on China is increasing. Okay, we are becoming an import-dependent economy on China. We don't manufacture a single laptop, whereas India is the largest consumer of laptops in the world, just to give an example. Okay, how does it square? How do this number square with 32% of manufacturing value added in India, and still we are such an import-dependent economy? Just when we need to think. Last slide, please. This is again. This is if our share of manufacturing has gone up so much, okay, doubled in this period, okay, why has, I mean, credit ratio, total credit available to or credit used by industry in the total has declined secularly over the decade? Is it possible? Can there be huge growth in manufacturing without the use of credit? Okay, so I think next slide, please. I think I rest my case here. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you, Professor Nagaraj. You stuck to your guns, so to speak. But I think the central point you're making is twofold. A, your disagreement with the use of NAS data, which is a separate point for discussion. But the second point which you make is that the growth in value added, which Professor Goldar is referring to, or the share in manufacturing value added double deflated, does not match with other indicators. But I think that is not central to gold dashboard, but he'll come back to reply. But let's come back. Okay. Satiki.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Anand, and it's a pleasure and honor to me to be part of this August panel, which includes Professor Nagaraj and Professor Suresh Babu, and also discussing Professor Goldar's paper, to whom all of us look forward, particularly those who work on industry and manufacturing. But I have some of the points to add with this very important discussion. First of all, I would say that I would agree, and everyone has agreed, that there is a difference, what Professor Goldar at the outset mentioned, that if we calculate manufacturing value added in current prices and constant prices, there is a difference. But to me, the difference is marginal. Because first of all, if you see that if we measure manufacturing value added in constant prices and current prices, the measurement of the share of manufacturing value added in constant prices was higher than current prices share till 2012-13. Only after 2012-13, you will see that the manufacturing value added share measured in terms of current prices is higher than the constant prices. What I am saying that it is not uniformly same for the past 20 years. So there were periods when the share of manufacturing value added measured in constant prices was higher than the current prices. But if we take 20-year period, so if we take 20-year period and measure the manufacturing value added in current and constant prices, the share of manufacturing value added in current prices comes to be 16.87% on an average, and in constant prices it comes to be 17.05%. So not much difference, even if we measure in terms of current and constant prices. While the share of services is 52%, since we are talking about premature deindustrialization, which is a long-term problem. It is not about a particular year, but we are facing an economy where the share of manufacturing value added in different measures is close to 17%. Now, I have a little more substantive point regarding this question of double deflation, which all the panelists have addressed. Now, first of all, I would say that there is an implicit assumption in this argument of Professor Goldar's that and it is a normative position that all the prices of different sectors of intermediate goods and the final output, as well as the output of other sectors, should move in tandem. But it never happened. It is not real. And at the same time, if we see the national account statistics from 2012-13 to 22-23, which gives price indices of output of different sectors as well as quantity indices, we'll find that the top 4 sectors where the prices rise much faster are agricultural and allied, then electricity, gas, water, public administration and defense, and construction. Now, manufacturing is in 2012-13 also, its price indices was just above the overall GDP price indices. And in 22-23, it is just below the overall GDP price deflator, which means that the relative position of manufacturing in terms of price movement more or less remains same in the past 10 years. Now, it is understandable that different outputs should have different prices. And there is nothing wrong, nothing unusual according to me, because what I think that of course it should be deflated according to the intermediate goods, and different outputs should be deflated according to the price indices of different sectors. But what I am also arguing that, see, if we see that in different sectors, the prices of output is constituted by different factors, which depends upon the nature of the product as well as the market, which the producers face both in the output as well as in input market. Now, agricultural prices are much more linked to international fluctuation of prices as well as seasonal fluctuations. And also, the price elasticity of demand is much low. So you can easily translate the input prices into output prices. In case of electricity, gas, water, or in case of primary products, in case of minerals, in case of certain intermediate goods, in certain services, you will find the existence of monopoly. So what Professor Suresh Babu was mentioning, that there the price is constituted by the cost of production with a markup, and depending upon the strength of the monopoly, the markup varies. So it is quite expected that all this output would vary, their prices would vary differently in different sectors. Now, I would also say that according to literature also, if you see that if we refer to the Kaldor-Verdun's law, what does it argue? It basically argues that the growth of productivity of manufacturing grows faster, the faster the growth of output in manufacturing, which basically says that the manufacturing sector's productivity increases much faster compared to other sectors. So the relative prices of manufacturing is expected to decline. There is nothing wrong if the manufacturing prices are increasing less faster than other sectors. And it is not also unusual. But I'm also saying that this is not only Kaldor-Verdun's law. So if the productivity growth increases, the relative prices would fall. It also comes from a neoclassical perspective. You will see from Balassa-Samuelson proposition, which was later revised to Balassa-Samuelson-Bohr's proposition, where the movements of different prices vary according to whether they're traded sectors, which are mostly manufacturing, and to the non-traded sectors, which are mostly services. So there also this difference in prices would occur in different segments was well recognized. This is nothing new. The other point which I would also want to mention is Baumol's cause disease, which basically argues that the productivity growth in services sector is relatively less compared to manufacturing. And as a result of that, the weight of services increases in GDP because of their low productivity. And that is precisely the reason why the share of services share increases in GDP, and which becomes a problem beyond the point for the growth itself. So all these theories basically argue that there is a tendency of manufacturing output prices to grow less faster than all other sectors. And that gives me to the next point, which I try to argue. But before that, I want to refer to another point which Professor Golda made, referring to this paper, Oselik and Osman's paper in 2023, which came in Cambridge Journal of Economics, recent paper, which once again revisits the premature deindustrialization debate. And there, as Professor Golda mentioned, that in advanced countries, this paper shows that the peak of manufacturing value added was reached at a corresponding real GDP per capita level of $9,000. And showing the states where the major industrial growth has happened, Professor Golder's argument is that if you take even of the 5 states, they reached their peak, which is close to this $9,000. And this is close to 25%. Exceptional case is Uttarakhand. I am really curious to know that how come the share of manufacturing in Maharashtra and Gujarat is 25% and 40%. And in case of Uttarakhand, manufacturing value added in state GDP comes out to 70% in a particular year. But leaving aside that, my point is that if we compare this value added, because this paper which Professor Golda refers to has not actually mentioned that this is being calculated on the basis of double deflation. So 25% peak with a $9,000, if we assume, since it is not mentioned, is done through single deflation. And Professor Golder here in his argument is arguing that this $9,000 level, the peak is reached in the 5 states of 25%. I think that this is not methodologically consistent, because either we have to compare with double deflation in both the cases, or we have to compare with single deflation in both the cases. If we use double deflation in this paper which he has referred, then of course the peak in advanced economies would not be in 25%, it would be much higher. So that is one thing which also I want to mention, that if we make this comparison, it may be misunderstood. My last point is that Kaldor wrote a paper in 1972, and the title of the paper was quite interesting. The title was Irrelevance of Equilibrium Economics. And there Kaldor was basically trying to analyze how Alan Young's notion of increasing returns to scale can be discussed along with Keynes's notion of effective demand. The simple point which Kaldor was trying to make, that the advantage of increasing returns which we get in manufacturing gets limited if there is a shortage or if there is a constraint in effective demand. What I will end by saying that we are discussing that we are reaching a peak of manufacturing with 25% or 30%. Just see the average share of durable consumer goods in average consumption basket in India. It is only 3.5%. So the question is not that the relative prices of manufacturing are increasing relatively slowly. It is nothing unusual according to me, but what I am trying to say that even if the relative prices are falling or increasing relatively slowly compared to other products, the growth of demand, if it had been much faster than the fall in relative prices, then you could have seen a higher share of manufacturing value added in GDP, which was expected. So even if the relative prices are falling, if the growth of manufacturing value added increases faster than the fall in relative prices, we could have shown an increased share of manufacturing value added, which has not happened in case of India, because as I said, that the share of these durable goods in average consumption basket as provided by national account statistics is very small. So my point is better to address this problem of premature deindustrialization as a structural problem, as a problem of demand, rather than confining it into a problem of estimation. So these are some of the points I thought that I would be adding to this discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Satyaki. Oh, have I got it? Yeah. Okay. I have now two choices. One, I am tempted to ask if Professor Goldar wants to respond to the discussants before I open it up for a general set of comments from the floor and other discussants, which the discussants can also participate in.
Yeah,
So
I think that will be better because a lot of points have been made. I will not answer all of them, but
fair enough.
these are more in the nature of discussion on any issue. But some of them, I think, which needs addressing, that I will do, and then we can, if needed, we can pick up.
Yeah. So then what I do is you take your response. After that, I'll open it up to the floor, in which I noticed that many eminent people participating in the webinar. I would like some of them to come in, and they can talk to Professor Goldar as well as to the observations made by the discussants as well. So go ahead.
Okay. I'll first begin with the points made by Satyaki. Those are relatively, simpler to answer. First of all, you must be wondering why Uttarakhand has such high manufacturing share. You have to look up the state GDP data. And if you look up the state GDP data, which it's not there, no question of single deflation, double deflation. Even in simple state GDP data, you'll find in Uttarakhand the share of manufacturing is quite high because for certain reasons. Anyway, I don't. Now, in the course of my presentation, I think I have been always arguing because different industries prices grow differently. That is the reason we need double deflation. It's not. I'm not saying we need double deflation because every industry's prices grow at the same way. That was not the argument at all. Rather, the argument was opposite. And the main point that I had made, which of course I agree with Satyaki on that point, the problem is that the manufacturing prices grow much slower than other sector prices. In a way, relative prices of manufacturing keeps falling. This is the source of the problem. Therefore, if you measure manufacturing sector share at current prices, the share will have a downward bias, a tendency to fall over time because manufacturing prices are not growing. And why that happens? Because of technological change, productivity improvement, manufacturing prices. And finally, point about the Satyaki, he says that you must have double deflation in both cases. Now, the paper he is referred to, that the Cambridge University press, they are not using any deflation. And even those who are using single deflated GVA, there is no single deflated GVA for USA, or there is no single. So some countries are already doing double deflation. USA or Japan or France or Europe, Brazil. So just in the data set that studies are using, it's already a mixture, because some countries, their national account is at double deflated, so they are using double deflation. Some countries' national accounts are in single deflation, so those data in. So I cannot make Indian double deflation and then say, no, all the other countries, I will also have double. That's just not possible. So anyway, this is just a thought. Now I'll move to other points. Now, one important point that has been made by Professor Nagaraj is, as long as our price data are not good enough, perhaps use of double deflation is problematic. He has not referred to which price index he has a problem. But I don't think Indian price data are any worse than other countries' price data who are already applying double deflation. Anyway, I'll not pursue this point further. But more important point is, how do we explain the 32% share of manufacturing? This is the share at 2004-5 prices, applying double deflation. And suppose if when you notice that there was a different diagram where I used 2011-12 prices. In the 11-12 prices, when I measured, the share was not that high. Share was much lower. It was about 21% so. So it depends on which is the base year you use. So one should not, the table he had shown is actually the World Bank, I think, WI data, which is at current prices. All these countries' data were at current prices. At current prices, of course, Indian share is low. So there is no conflict between the two. But Suresh's points were more from the methodological point, more important. And certainly, of them, I think 2 points which I apply very much to my work here is, one is applies to national accounts, applies to claims data, applies to my work, is that for applying double deflation, past year index is better. But all the indices that I am using are basically last pay index. But even in the national accounts, indices being used are basically last pay index. So that is a problem. So, but how serious it is, we don't know. But obviously, some sort of a system where prices, some sort of a linked system where every year price deflators are being computed with the previous year's base, some such system would be, I think, much more appropriate. The second point here raised was, suppose there are cycles in the data, and so the sudden ups and downs that I'm showing could be. So can we eliminate cycles? I think methodologically, it's a very good point. So this is a new suggestion that the series I have shown, maybe I can try to remove the cycles. But I have a more important point here. Many papers in the area of premature deindustrialization, where an econometric model is being estimated, where the dependent variable is manufacturing value added out of GDP, if there are cycles, where is the cycle in the econometric model? So if these, I think 10 papers there, nobody has bothered about the cycle. So why should you burden my work with the cycle thing here? And I agree that there should be a battery of tests for finding out whether there is, I've been too simplistic. But I must note, every paper is not doing both GVA as well as employment. For example, the Cambridge University press paper only looking at, so you cannot say every paper must do GVA, must do employment, must do this, and then say that is not necessary. So here I have taken some simple thing. I think with that I'll stop for the time.
This is clearly been a very interesting discussion so far. And maybe what I would like to do is, are there people who are in the participants, anybody wishes to come in, make a comment, ask questions? You can raise a flag. I'll try to get you to respond. Otherwise, I have some observations I'll try to make and give the floor back to the commentators if they wish to add something. But
Professor Anand, there are some in the chats, there are questions.
There is a question in the chat. Let me open the chat. Yeah. Okay, there was a point raised by Mr. Anand saying, how do you reconcile the argument that there has been no deindustrialization or the with the situation many of the products that were earlier manufactured in the country? Basically about the fact that the trade structure shows that much of what was produced in India is now being imported, and you in fact have much higher import dependence related to a point which Nagaraj also made. So do you want to respond to this?
The question is not very clear to me. There are products.
Essentially, the point is that on the one hand, you are saying this implies there is no deindustrialization. But if you look at the trade data, it shows that there has actually been increased dependence on import of manufactured goods from China. So in a sense, our external dependency has risen at a time when your calculations seem to suggest that the share of manufacturing value added has risen. How do you reconcile the two?
No, I don't think that's a problem, because when you get into global value chains, you will have to also import as well as export. And through global, if you are raising your GVA, domestic GVA by having increasing participation in global value chain, the share of imports in total as a ratio of total value of production is likely to rise, as well as we export. So export to output will rise and import to output will rise. Simply because import to output value is rising does not mean that you are getting deindustrialized.
And of course, Rajesh's point you've already covered, because the estimates are sensitive to alternative displators, particularly quality adjusted ICT price indices. But the interesting thing about the ICT example is it illustrates the challenge of double deflation. Ideally speaking, one of the things which comes out is double deflation. Any form of deflation is very sensitive to the quality of the price data, and the quality issues are global. They're not necessarily limited to India. Hedonic prices are a global factor, which virtually everybody dealing with commodities, both in automobiles or in ICT, have noticed that that's a challenge. The indices are problematic.
To say a few things, I'm full stressed.
Oh, Shrestha sir.
Yes.
Very nice to have you. I've seen you at least virtually after a long time.
Yes, you are right. For a long time. I have 2 points. I enjoyed listening to Professor Golder as usual, and nice, excellent presentation. And also, I enjoyed the panelists, particularly Babu. I have some points from the things which I know better, like what kind of problems with the data of the national accounts statistics and the strength and the weaknesses and all that. So my first comment is I couldn't understand why Professor Golder chose the 6 states data and not the national data. Because there are problems with the manufacturing at the national level and the state level. At the national level, there used to be a time when we used to use uniform data for the organized manufacturing from the ASI data, but it is not so now. At the national level, it is the MCA data, which is used largely because it was felt that the ASI is not capturing them. But it has not happened at the state level, because there is a problem in the MCA data. State-wise, you cannot get very easily, because you do not know which company performs where and where it is registered. So all those problems are there. That is one point. My second point is that yes, everybody knows that the double deflation is very good, and we also want double deflation. We have tried several times, but we have always put down the things because the details, necessary details, are not available to do double deflation. I recall long ago, Professor Minas used to share us, and he told us that double deflation we are talking about. Double deflation is not always superior. You have not read the literature. See the paper of Bakar. You understand that the output is at the basic prices, the material inputs are at the market prices, and there is a component of the taxes and products and subsidies. Then, when there are subsidies, what kind of relationship do you have by double deflation? So, double deflation is not always superior, but mostly it is superior. That was one point. So, it has to be seen with caution. The third point which I have, of course, already our panelists have spoken very well, that in India we have the problem of the price indexes. We do not have a proper producer price index. Professor Golder was chairing the session. I remember we did propose, but it is stuck somewhere. It has not yet come. Still, we are managing with the wholesale price. But this wholesale price is at the national level. So what do you do at the state level? It's not there. So when you talk of the constant prices, as Professor Golder has taken in his away, so that price, when you make the constant prices, firstly you are using the ASI data, which is that kind of the breakup of the ASI data, and then jacked up or jacked down on the basis of the MCA data at the national level. So there are some manipulations over there. And two, that when you talk of the price index, you are using the All India price index, which may not necessarily be good for all states. So these are some of the points. And the last point, not the least point, Professor Golder said very clearly that why top this year we get some result at 2004 price, right? We got another result at 11-12 price. Now the price is being again, this is again divided, again you get another result. What is your information? The system of national accounts, now the 2025 SNA is already ready and just to be released this month only. But the 2008 SNA or even they have always said that don't talk of the fixed rate. You should have the chain base. So once we need to work on that. So there are a lot of things which comes up after listening to these nice lectures, and I take those points into account and try to convey to the WASPI through the Indian Association for Research in National and Government Wealth. And also I have been writing Professor Golder, he is chairing for the revision base, but unfortunately this time I don't see that along with the base year revision, the changes or the improvements in national accounts is also considered. If they don't consider now, it will be something very sad, because the next time, I mean, this will remain for another 10-12 years, and you have to always listen to criticism of the database. Thank you very much, sir, for patient listening to me.
Thank you, Dr. Kulshrestha. Maybe what I'll do is, before asking Santosh, who's got a flag up, Professor Golder, do you wish to respond to Professor Kulshrestha?
Do you suggest that, or
should I take Santosh also and you do both together? Okay, fine. Santosh, you had a point.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. So it's a quick question to Professor Golder. So as he showed this, with double deflator, the share of manufacturing kept increasing. But just I wanted to bring his attention to the fact that also, like during that period, like beginning 2010-11, we have seen the decline of private investment as percentage of GDP considerably. That is number one. Number two is we have also seen since 2011-12, the core sector, the capacity utilization of the core sectors like electricity, cement, steel. So we have seen, some of them either constant or the utilization has declined. So how do we reconcile with this fact that, there is an increase in the share of manufacturing, at the same time there is a decline in investment and decline in the capital utilization? Thank you, sir.
Okay. Is there anybody else who wants to come in before I give the floor back to Professor Golder? Professor Golder, why don't you?
Okay. Yeah, I will try to answer. First is, why did I go to state level data? Why not do the analysis of the national data? That I did. I began with the national level data and showed that there is a rising trend and there is no inverted U shape. Actually, because there is no peak is coming. So that was the first point. That is, I showed at the national level. After I showed at the national level that it does not work, there is no peak is coming, has reached, then I go to state level to confirm. And there is another reason why the state level analysis is being done, because most of the research, econometric research in the premature devaluation, deindustrialization area, use a panel of different countries, different years to study. So in India, if I take only Indian annual time series, it's not a panel. So that is the reason I need to create a panel and the state-wise it's done. And I'm not the first to do it, incidentally. The Amiripu and Subramaniam paper is of the same time. In a way, I'm copying their paper. They also did state-wise and year-wise, and they found out which state, which year they are, and then they did not, I don't remember, they remember estimating an econometric model. Now, another question which Dr. Kulshrestha raised, that, well, if once you have got ASI data, how do you inflate it to reflecting MC? I'm not inflating. I'm using ASI value added divided by GSDP directly. ASI value added is being deflated and GSDP is being deflated, in a way being corrected. So there is no issue of MCA being superimposed in this. A more valid point that he has raised, which is, I think, quite valid and applies, and therefore, in a way, is a limitation of my work, is that output is at basic prices, while intermediate inputs are inclusive of transport and taxes. And but our price indices are net of tax. So they are good for deflating output, but they are not good for deflating intermediate input. This problem is not there only for me. It is from 1994, Balakrishnan and Pushpam Gadhan paper and Suresh Babu. It is right from there. Everywhere, the price indices are the same, and you are using both for output and you for but for intermediate input, you need to include transport, trade margin, and nobody does that. So that's a problem. But there is no simple solution. Hopefully, when the PPI series is built, which will provide both producers, output side price index, as well as the input price index for each industry, this problem will be solved. I must emphasize, I am never claimed in this paper that my estimates of double deflation are 100% correct. No, they may be 90% correct, maybe they're 80%, but they are showing a direction that had we brought in double deflation in our 2004 national accounts revision time, if we had, then our national accounts would have shown such an increase in the share of manufacturing at constant prices. May not be 32, maybe 28, maybe 27, but certainly not 16. So that is the main point. We did not do it in the 2004 series. We did not do it in the 2011 series. And that is the reason always our data have been showing stagnant and falling manufacturing share, creating scope for a lot of pessimistic impressions being created everywhere that the manufacturing is not doing well. Finally, how do we explain a fast manufacturing growth in the face of low investment rate and problems with the infrastructure sector? Difficult to answer, but manufacturing sector, of course, have a much faster productivity growth. But this question, of course, relates also to something which Professor Nagaraj raised. That is, if the credit flow is not growing to the industry sector, how do we reconcile a growing share of the manufacturing in GVA and falling share of industry in credit flow? Certainly a problem to explain. But this, as a matter, I don't think this maybe others can do research and find out. But I must point out, 23-24, manufacturing has grown by 12%. Was there a huge private investment? Was there a huge increase in infrastructure? Nothing. This sort of behavior of manufacturing, high growth, Indian economy has been maintaining a fairly good growth rate despite the reduction, fall in the investment and infrastructure problems and all that. So this has been there. So I don't think we should doubt the number. Even this way, you can doubt even the GDP numbers. How can you show a 6% growth in GDP when your infrastructure is not doing well, when the credits are not going, but it is having a 6% growth. So I don't think I have to pursue that. This is a matter, again, others can do a research on.
Okay. Yeah. All right, Professor Kulshrestha, Dr. Kulshrestha.
Wanted to say, Professor Golda, I never thought that I am telling that you adjusted the figures of the states. No, but the states are already doing that because the states cannot prepare the estimates making use of the MCA data. They use the the ASI data, but overall ASI data is smaller than the MCA data, which is at the national level. So some kind of the adjustments are already made at the state level. So it is not you. I never mentioned that kind of thing. And then another limitation is there, but then you must to expect that you have considered only the organized sector, but much is happening in the unorganized segment. A lot of incentives are given by the government to the unorganized segment. So maybe some kind of capital investment goes there, but it is not reflecting in the ASI data or the MCA data. So I mean, there is a lot which our young researchers should try to do work and then explain, then expecting everything from some golden versions, hard work and so nicely explained. Thank you very much for
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kulshrestha. In fact, Professor Goldas was limiting his response only to the exercise which he had done at the state level where he was using primarily SI data. But, I think this whole discussion has brought out some very interesting points. And since Professor Goldar is here, and one can capture is here and he's chairing the Committee on National Accounts, it's very useful. I think something which Dr. Kulshrestha mentioned, I think is an agenda for which we should be pushing the states to work harder on, which is that we need much more decentralized price data. The WPI is certainly all right for purposes of all India estimates. We do need state level prices. And as the CPI experience shows, there are considerable state level characteristics to price movement. So it's an open question. If we could get intermediate input prices and so on and so forth at the state level, how would such an exercise actually translate at the state level is an open question, but it's not something which is there in your exercise. I fully agree that it is not something anybody has done so far. The other interesting point which is there in what Professor Kulshrestha mentioned about the fact that we are not adequately pricing in transport, trade margins, and so on. So the double deflation is artificial because it's not like-to-like comparison. So one set is at basic prices, the other point is at market prices. That point is absolutely valid. In fact, one of the reasons why National Accounts has been reluctant to go for double deflation is because of an incomplete price vector. The work on generating a more complete price series is work in progress. And I know that there is research which points out that double deflation with incomplete price vectors under certain circumstances can be better. But I think there's an IMF working paper which shows that the impact in different countries has been different. And they've done a comparison of multiple countries which are currently doing double deflation and showed that their impact has been differential. So this again is a thing which I would like more people to look at in India. The tendency has typically been to sort of say that because India is not doing double deflation, therefore its growth is overstated. I think the message which is coming out from your paper is that that is not necessarily true. The growth could be overstated, growth could be understated. It depends. And there is some evidence to suggest that at least in manufacturing sector, the growth has been understated. So should we move toward double deflation? The answer is yes. But what we need to do to improve the price vectors in order to make double deflation possible is still work in progress. And hopefully, maybe then the next time the National Accounts revision happens, you will see some of these coming out. I don't know. You will be in a better position to state. So I would like, unless the organizers want to bring something else in, if it's all right, we are at 5:15. We are well past our time. So I'd like to thank everybody, thank ISID for hosting this discussion. I think this has been a very interesting discussion on a topic which has engaged lots of people, including in EPW articles and columns. And I hope some of this will show up as responses to Professor Goldar's paper in formal writing as well. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Yeah,
and
thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I hope some of you will write up your discussions also and send them as things so that it will be available to a larger audience to see, because there were very interesting points being made. I'm sure some of you have published it, but if you have feel free to send emails across to people to
Dr.
tell them they're the
Anand, your observations on state-wise prices, how to allocate the uh, uh, in national level value added to state, those are all important issues, but I can't discuss them. What's
No,
that?
I know. I'm just saying this is what I hope the
Yeah.
National Accounts Committee
So,
will take up with
yeah.
the states for going ahead.
That's right. This is not the forum where I can discuss them. All
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Thank you very much.
But as I said, I encourage people to write on this because that will what be really fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.